Jai Shri Ram, everyone. Yesterday, I watched Ram Ke Naam, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a basically anti-Hindutva documentary that was made about the Ram Janambhoomi movement back in the early 90s, before the actual Babri Masjid demolition happened. So I think it was published a couple months before it in like September of 92 or so. And it talks mostly about the events leading up to the Rath Yatra that Advani and those people went on, and all of those kinds of things, but before the actual demolition of the masjid. And what was really interesting to me was not anything new that I learned from it, but just was the fact of how the other side, our enemies, our opponents, are very skilled at portraying their view as being the kind of mainstream normal view that any reasonable person would have. And what I mean by that is they gave some of these examples, which are obviously fake and anecdotal, about all of this Hindu-Muslim unity that supposedly existed before these big bad Hindutvawadi forces divided the people, and all of this kind of Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb kind of narrative that they have, that everybody was united and so on. Now, obviously we know that that's not true, but the average person, the average person that lives either in a city, so they're totally disconnected from what the actual India is like because they've been living in a large metro area for generations, or people that are just from a part of India where Hindu-Muslim communal tensions are not the forefront of what people think of when they think of politics. I think people like that would watch this would really be maybe not totally against the Ram Janambhoomi movement, but if they didn't know about the Ram Janambhoomi movement prior to watching this and they just watched this, it would be pretty convincing to this certain type of person that is not really aware of the fact that any information that they would get on any political topic is heavily filtered through whichever ideological lens that the people who are making that media are that they hold to themselves. And I think that if you're not really familiar with politics or you don't follow it, it would be difficult to really ascertain that because, one, like I talked about, they kind of bring up this trope of Hindu-Muslim unity that supposedly existed in the past, which unfortunately a large number of people do believe that did exist because of, maybe indoctrination in school, maybe indoctrination through the media, or general ignorance, or a combination of all three of those things. And another thing is they paint any kind of riots that happen against the Muslim community as being these big humanitarian issues, where riots that happen against Hindus are, of course, not seen as humanitarian issues. Now, personally, I don't think that it makes much sense to really talk about either of these sides as being primarily humanitarian issues, because as we all are familiar with, if we're mature adults, if someone commits a riot against you, you're going to commit a riot against them. That's just how things work. As if you are a man and you stand up for yourself, that's how things work. Obviously, there are some communities that don't stand up for themselves because they're weak and soft, and then there are some communities that can't really stand up for themselves, not because of any flaw on their part, but because of the fact that they're so overrun in terms of numbers or the legal situation or what have you. But they showed some dead bodies of Muslims and talked about this. They also showed dead bodies from the Ayodhya firing incident. The Kokari brothers, those people that when the Mulayam Singh Yadav government fired upon all of these people, that they got killed. They showed images of that too, but they didn't actually talk about that in the sense of, this was government overreach and this was oppressive, so on and so forth. They just showed the bodies, and it wasn't projected towards the viewer in the same way that the bodies of the dead Muslim bodies were shown to people. And I think that, the reason that I bring this up is basically to say that we do need some of this on our side, this ability to put forward a message in a way that doesn't seem like you're trying to convert someone to your political point of view, right? We all know we have lots of journalists who are on our side that do a great job, but they do a great job from our view because they're biased in the favor of our views, right? They're not exactly the kind of person that you can show to some impartial observer that neither supports the BJP nor thinks the BJP is evil. Someone that doesn't really support Ram Janambhoomi but also doesn't really oppose it. It's difficult to really find a lot of media that's on our side that's kind of able to speak to that average person in the middle and get them to have some kind of either intellectual or emotional reaction that would get them to be on our side, whereas the left or the breaking India forces or anti-Hindu forces, whatever you want to call them, they're very good at this, okay? And speaking from a purely just a viewership point of view, other than the fact that I totally disagreed with the entire premise of this Ram Ke Naam documentary, I thought it was very well made from just shooting the film and getting the narration and the quality and all those things. It was very well made because they were also very good at portraying us, meaning people who are, in favor of Hindutva and very much in favor of the Ram Janmabhoomi issue, as being kind of extremists and crazy and ridiculous. They showed this image of someone having this kind of emotional reaction to some this VHP ad that was airing on TV, portrayed Ram as a child being in a jail, and the kind of message was, obviously the Babri Masjid is like a jail for Ramlala and we need to free him and stuff like that. There are other instances here where people are painted as emotional. There's also instances here where people on our side are painted as kind of blind believers, like, we do what we're told, we buy into what we're told, we don't check up facts. There is obviously the archaeological evidence back in 1990. During that time period, I'm guessing there was far less of that was out, and obviously far, far less of it that was out in the public sphere so that the average person would be able to readily find it. But it was kind of like the arguments of, there was a mandir here before. That was kind of totally, it was either ignored by the documentary or it was kind of shown as these Hindus are just talking about something that supposedly happened a really long time ago, and we're just good humanistic people that care about what's going on now, and we don't want to drudge up the past, and all of this kind of thing. And they also talked, they had these like impromptu interviews with random people on the street, asking them, what they thought. And of course, this also tried to portray our side as being kind of ridiculous and unhinged, because they did take some effort to show people who are more kind of angry or emotional being on our side, and the people who are talking in a more reasoned, calm kind of tone were on the anti-Mandir side. That was one thing that I noticed kind of over and over again. And also a lot of the people on our side had visible Hindu symbols, like, people at the VHP rally that had saffron things on and stuff like that. They did also intersperse enough reasonable seeming people so that it didn't overtly look like they were trying to do that as well, because I think that even the average viewer that's not very interested in things, there's a certain level of bias that is kind of easily detectable, and I feel like they did a good job at staying just underneath that, where someone that doesn't actually have any views on this subject isn't really going to pick up that this is heavily biased. And also the fact that there's the historical wrong of Babur demolishing a mandir, and much more importantly than that, this long history of Islamic invaders and rulers demolishing lots of temples across the country, especially in the north. That was kind of seen as, or it was portrayed both in the instances of questioning and when people would talk back and forth, and in the general framing of the documentary as these people are trying to dredge this up. Who cares about this old stuff? We just care about people, and that's what's important. And then another thing they did was they talked to some random poor people about what they thought, and they were saying basically your standard non-political poor person's idea, which is, I don't have any opinions because I'm poor. I just am worried about, well, how does this affect me in my normal life because I don't have any kind of principles when it comes to politics. So you heard, like I remember someone was talking about, I don't like this issue. I don't like the Ram Mandir because now we don't get as much business in our shops that we operate because there's, traffic blockades or whatever the case may be. And then some other poor people were talking about, well, we actually care about food and this basic development kind of issues and this, this other narrative that we hear from the media and from people that disagree with us and from opposition politicians that, well, what we should really be interested in is development and food and so on. And so, this Bijli, Khana, Kapda, whatever that formula, that list of government handouts that people say, that we should be concerned with that and not concerned with this issue and portraying it as you're just trying to get people's votes and stir up emotion and all those kinds of things. And again, I think that, because of the fact that we actually have eyes and ears and think about this reasonably and we have an actual view on this, it's very easy for us to see through all of that BS and see it as an extremely biased propaganda piece that's trying to convince people of the other side. But the issue, again, is that the average apolitical person that doesn't have an opinion on this issue one way or another can't see that because they don't understand the issue. They are going to basically interact with this information the way in which it is presented to them. And like I said before, it was presented very well. If I was someone that was an anti-Hindutva, secularist kind of person, I would really love this documentary. And again, I think that as far as just the quality and production and writing and all of those kinds of things, it was a high-quality documentary. It did exactly what the anti-Ram Mandir, anti-Hindutva brigades wanted it to convince people of. And also, I wanted to end on this. It was done before the actual Babri Masjid demolition. So you can imagine how much more quote-unquote ammunition that these people would have if they had waited until after that event to put this out. So anyway, that's all I've got for you guys today. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you haven't seen Ram Ke Naam, you can find it on YouTube. That's where I watched it. I think it was like an hour and 15 or an hour and a half long or so. It's in Hindi, obviously, but there are also English subtitles if you're not comfortable with Hindi. Jai Shri Ram.